The first time I did it, it was like black and white coming into color or like fuzzy coming into clarity. It was as if I was, really standing in the center of my own life. I was here. And that was extraordinary. That's something I can trust. It's not in my mind. And immediately I just feel like, okay, I'm back. I'm back at center. And I don't even know that I'd ever felt that before. There's a non-judgmentalness about your work and about the way that the coherent body work is framed. It's a safe container. So much of the disease is really thinking. It manifests with ultimately behaviors, struggles with body image. There's just so much self-judgment and it becomes very ingrained. Getting in touch with the body and with sensations alone. I'm not in a leotard looking in a mirror with a bunch of other people judging. It just really supports not going back into story and experiencing in my body, in the moment, fresh and new, something that's happening. And so that's very helpful because I think with the body image stuff, it's just so often such old ingrained messages.
So I'm here with Sara. Thank you so much for joining me.
I'm in my late 40s and recently found your book and did a series of shorter workshops before plunging in a little bit more deeply into what you had to offer. And I immediately connected with not only the exercises, but what I intuited as a philosophy, if you will, behind your work. A good place to kick off is just, I remember the quote at the beginning of your book was Viktor Frankl. And I immediately connected with that. And also find it surprising or unexpected that that type of quote would be at the beginning of this book, that I expected to be all about the body. I started dancing with classical ballet training quite young. I was 4 when I had my first ballet lesson. It became increasingly clear that like that was the path I was going to choose. And my mother had the aspiration of becoming a ballet dancer, and she'd started lessons very late, relatively late, as a teenager, and had shared with me that she always thought, well, if I ever have a child who's interested in this, I'll make sure that they get proper training.
Did you feel like, oh, this is it, I love it? Or was that a slow burn on that? Because it sounds like there was that element too.
Yeah.
Yours, or was
Yeah, I think it was both and sort of. I definitely, my relationship to dance was the most important thing for many years of my life. So there was definitely a there for me. I never felt explicitly pushed by my mom, but there were a lot of maybe less directly communicated hopes and aspirations and high expectations. And so I think that energy of an unrealized dream of a parent can, yeah, could only have informed to a certain degree what my array of options presented, were. I started at a local ballet school. In fact, the school my mother had trained at when she was a girl. And then by 14, I went to a regional school that was linked to a professional ballet company where I was in the apprentice company. So that was my first year of high school, and then spent all afternoon and evening in classes and rehearsing and performing with the professional company. So that really gave me a window into what might be possible in terms of a profession. And then it was the following year that I was awarded a full scholarship to the School of American Ballet in New York. And that had been my dream for a number of years at that point,
mm,
to dance professionally at New York City Ballet. And that's a feeder school. So that began more intense training and also leaving home, at a young age and focusing even more so there. I was 15 years old and was very focused at that point that that's what I wanted to do.
I mean, it's a big deal,
Uh,
right? You're young, you're super focused, you're at a elite level. And I think
yeah.
for a lot of athletes, that happens, right? You have this drive, you're working with your body, you're skilled, you feel the feedback of being successful. And I think it's a wonderful experience to have. And it's always interesting when something changes. I'm interested to hear how you got to whatever level and then what changed for you, because
Yeah.
you eventually went on to a different profession.
Very different path. What was happening in the lead up there, I always felt a deep connection with the music, and it was almost like something else took over. And at its height, especially when I was performing, it felt as if the music was kind of flowing through me.
Yeah.
So years later, I would really only begin to realize how powerful and potent that kind of experience is, which I ended up in a Zen monastery decades later and realized, like, oh, that was kind of like wu wei or non doing. And no
Yeah.
wonder I'm grieving and missing that and don't know where else to find it.
Mm.
But it was many, many years, of course, of daily hard work, discomfort, waking up at the crack of dawn, not getting much sleep, and then increasingly very competitive levels where you're also dealing at a young age with relational
Yeah.
issues that you don't necessarily feel prepared for on an emotional or psychological level. That ultimately became quite challenging. It wasn't too long before all of that kind of just came crashing in on me. 15, completely by myself. And I think the competitive pressure coupled with just this unfamiliar environment really, it started to really play with me. That started to come out in terms of perfectionism to the extreme, restricting food, and got to a place where it was noticed by teachers and suggested that maybe it'd be a good idea for me to take a visit home for a little bit and see what was going on. And so that's actually how I left, not necessarily thinking that I wouldn't return, but I didn't. And so that began a whole other chapter of really struggling with an eating disorder and being back in the home environment where there was a lot of other stuff, also challenging things going on that I was trying to grapple with. It took me many years to process that and begin to find a path forward and out of it instead of just being in freeze mode, not knowing what to do next.
I'm surprised that they don't have staff for that.
I think it's probably changed now. And in fact, I've heard from others that it has. I mean, this was the it kind of it kind of surprises me too. But then again, I think as more incidents of that were visible, and I mean the truth is that was visible back in the 60s, if not earlier, with Balanchine coming in and having this very definitive view of what the ideal dancer looked like and dancers striving to achieve that, even if it wasn't natural for them. But yeah, it just was clearly not a path I could continue on without more support and didn't have the resources at 15 years old.
Can you speak to people who aren't familiar with Balanchine and what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, you had the sort of legacy of Russian ballet. You had these Russian dancers coming and touring Western Europe and starting to get exposure. And Balanchine was really an early choreographer who was working with artists like Picasso, who were doing set design. Can you imagine? And so the School of American Ballet was essentially born as Balanchine's school. Why was that different? Balanchine's choreography was also unique. So there were several things he was doing differently. One, he was taking Russian ballet technique and stretching it more to its extreme articulation. And so in some ways that necessitated the body going beyond what it had in the past, whether that was certain positioning of an arm or a leg or jumping on point. He was also creating new storyless ballets. And so instead of what we all know as like Sleeping Beauty and Swan Lake and the Nutcracker, where there's a clear story around it, he was creating shorter ballets that were often ensemble pieces that didn't necessarily have a defined narrative or story. The story was in the steps, really, in the choreography and the interaction between dancers. So those were two quite unique things happening in the world of ballet. And as that got more attention, the school got more funding, you started to see just a kind of flourishing of that. And so that was sort of what I was aiming for. That's the ideal that I had in my mind as to the type of ballet dancer I wanted to be, the type of choreography I wanted to be dancing. And one thing that I was thinking of as I was being introduced to your work with Coherent Body was I remember that period of really dreaming and working hard and auditioning to try and get accepted to a number of schools. I would lay awake at night and I would not only visualize a certain choreography or dances that I wanted to do, but I would feel in my body the movement of that. So even though I wasn't necessarily doing it full out, there was something very powerful about almost building muscle memory, even seemingly laying still, but like feeling certain stretching. And I love your half body stretch and elongation because it takes me back to feeling a sense of, I think, agency and feeling a sense of presence and elongation in my body that I think I also lost for many years after everything changed.
I have to say, people get hooked on certain things because of what's happening in their body. Like ballet, people fall in love with it because they do. They feel that agency, they feel taking up space, they feel the gracefulness.
Exactly. Yeah, the two
Yeah,
go together.
yeah,
And
yeah.
it never really came easily for me. Like movement came easily. And having a quality of movement and shaping space or moving through space came easily. But, I don't have at all the stereotypical Balanchine body and had to work very hard to be able to technically do certain things,
Oh,
including as my body was changing. And it was around that time at 15, 16 that I started to notice really persistent pain here on the right side of my back. For years, I felt that for decades, not really knowing what it was and feeling crazy, talking about how I feel like I have this hump. And then in my mid 40s, finally went to a doctor and asked about it. And after being examined, was like, oh, yeah, you have a subtle scoliosis and a gibbus, which is essentially a hump. I was
mhm.
like, really? Validating in some
Yeah,
strange way. I've remained fairly active. I've gone through different phases. And so there were years of Ashtanga yoga, all kinds of healing modalities and practices. But I continued to connect strongly with things that were, you know, utilizing my body as kind of a way in
yeah,
to connect with myself. And yet, despite that, had not been able to find a consistent way to deal with the pain that I mentioned, even with body work that would help, where I'd get in touch with emotion, but then it would come back.
yeah,
And also not feeling comfortable in my own body in that, I had very hyperextended knees. I suppose not that unusual for dancers. I felt uncomfortable standing because my knees would start to hurt. And I felt like I couldn't find home or a center point in my body. And that bothered me. So then, of course, as a perfectionist and control freak, it's like, oh, let's latch onto that and try to fix it. The more I would try to kind of self adjust, honestly, the more I would feel like I was losing my way rather than finding it. So I think what I really connected to with your work was from the beginning, the three keys, recognizing all of a sudden, like, whoa, I've been standing so far back. My weight has been so far back. And I remember I used to have corrections in dance class about bringing my weight forward. So I was like, okay, that resonates. But just these subtle adjustments that suddenly left me feeling more at ease just standing.
mm,
And and then I think the really big breakthroughs started to happen as I was doing some of the anterior tilt work and loosening up the shoulder girdle and the diaphragm, because all of a sudden, this thing that has just so consistently felt like a constriction, all of a sudden it was like I could feel that loosening up and I could feel myself moving from a place that it wasn't that muscle like gripping and forcing it. And that was incredibly freeing. And as you can imagine, emotion came up around that, as well as a number of different things I started to work through.
that's great because that the coupling of things, the coupling of in order to feel comfortable in my body, I have to work really hard to get there. And
Yes.
you have to meet an ideal.
Ah,
It just becomes a part of the body story. And what we do in this work is we try to separate that out so that your body of resource is just a human standing on earth. It's not to perform, it's not to be perfect,
yeah.
it's not even to correct anything. So with your mild scoliosis, we're not aiming to correct it. We're actually just aiming to give the body the information it needs to perform its job. So if you're a really good manager, let's say, you give the person that you're managing the resources it needs to do its job. Because I say that the body's evolved for millions of years to stand on the earth and it knows how to do it. We don't have to micromanage it. In fact, we get in the way. So what we do
Absolutely.
is we look at it from a different way. And then that's when that story emerges. I think part of it is because you do have a history of looking inward and trying to understand your story and trying to piece it out, especially at that critical age you were doing that. You're already aware of that. And this opening in your body gives you permission to look at it a different way because now we're making a fundamental change in how you experience yourself every day. And then when we start to bring the eye work into your spinal clarity, I find that that in particular seems to help with those people who have scoliosis, especially the feeling of it in their mid and upper back.
Yeah, it's almost like a scratch you can't itch, just that feeling that I had for so many years of like, I feel out of balance, but I don't know exactly what's wrong or how to fix it. And I know I feel a lot better when I go and get a massage or shiatsu, but it doesn't feel like I can hold on to it or keep it. This evolutionary river that you talk about, tapping into something, into resource that is there and has nothing to do with my efforting or my striving or my story, right? And that I find incredibly freeing and supportive, especially at this stage in my life where many things are converging to kind of move from a doing kind of model to learning that being is enough. It doesn't have to be performative. I'm not trying to prove my worth anymore. There's not something I have to achieve. And also, I don't really know fully what comes next. I mean, you and I spoke a little bit about this, but I'm at a place where it's like, I don't know what comes next. And it's so tempting to want to then let the ego engage and like, let's steer here, steer there. But I've found it so powerful to couple the internal work that I'm doing with the coherent body work because I literally can feel in my body when that's happening. And so I have very tangible feedback and signals now when I start to go into that.
Mm.
And even after many years of meditation, it just works at a different level that's very complementary. So I'm really appreciating that there's this resourcing that has, again, nothing to do with something I need to fix, effort, strive for. I think the other piece, circling back to the Viktor Frankl quote at the beginning of your book, is I think when you come from a place, I mean, I can only speak for myself, but feeling powerless over many different things at an early age, it was very appealing to me to, or I held out hope that there was something that I could do regardless of circumstance, regardless of others or what I didn't have power over, that could help me move forward. But I didn't quite know how to do that or what that was. And so I think, again, this work is really amazing in that it offers that, but in a very, again, physical, tangible way. And because I have that foundational connection with my body, it's been, yeah, it's been very, very helpful to feel not only in touch with my sense of agency, but that I can maybe hold a little bit longer or be a bit more present with the not knowing, that I can stand and find a way to be at ease even when I don't necessarily have know what the next step one, two, and three is or the plan or so there's a kind of ease that is new in my body that is really wonderful.
That's great. Are you able to scratch that itch that you're talking about earlier?
Well, what's wonderful is with this, it doesn't feel like it needs scratching much anymore, which is nice. So it's like the discomfort isn't there as often because my body's moving in new ways. And I have found, in particular, there are certain exercises, even just the simple kind of putting my hand on my diaphragm for some feedback. It can be very subtle, but if I'm just walking with that, all of a sudden, I think I shared this with you. The first time I did it, it was like black and white coming into color or like fuzzy coming into clarity. It was as if I was, really standing in the center of my own life. Like I was here. And that was extraordinary. So every now and then when I'm feeling that itch a little bit, just putting my hand there and being mindful of it, And I still struggle at times. I wonder, am I trying to fix and play around with this from a place of control? But I find that there's something very concrete about just following the exercise, placing my hand on my diaphragm. Like, no, that's real. That's something I can trust. It's not in my mind. And immediately I just feel like, okay, I'm back at center. And I don't even know that I'd ever felt that before. So it wasn't even remembering something that was like, this is new and this feels really good and different. I felt very energized by those kinds of changes.
So for people who are very driven by doing, what about the listening piece?
Oh, I love I love your listening from the front of the spine. I think that's how you put it. I feel like this is very relevant for where I am right now. This is a big piece of what I'm working on because I went from the doer that was very focused on something single focused, like a single point of focus, like ballet, to then studying economics and finance and funneling that into a career later on and exhausting myself over and over again. And so I think that this is something I'm still very much in the process of working on in the here and now. There's a listening on the inside and a listening on the outside. And what I've found in playing with it is that initially there was a kind of resistance that I recognized in allowing myself to listen to the outside that maybe fully or with that much openness. And so learning what is the boundary that I need when I'm listening to someone else? What do I want to let in fully? What can I let in fully? Experimenting with that. But also, I think just the willingness sometimes to pause and listen. That's been important to slow down at times when I recognize my tendency to just push through, either out of fear or that's often what it is fear or anxiety. I got to do this. I got to pause. But I have to tell you, there was also a class where someone asked a question around this pacing or speed. It was very helpful because you also mentioned the importance of basically, as you integrate this, it's not necessarily about always slowing down. Like, if that's helpful, I hear that that's good. But the whole point, right, is to be able to function in the here and now, whether I'm moving or I'm still or I'm talking or I'm not, whatever it is, and to be able to listen. So I found that also encouraging that it's a process. It's introducing more flexibility of mind, essentially, and that there's not just one way to, like, you know, I practice this at this time of day in this place every day. It's about noticing as I walk and as I move and as I pick things up, right? And same with this inner listening. So, can I learn to listen in this conversation that
Yes.
we're having?
Yeah.
Not just tonight when I'm meditating by myself
Yes,
in a
exactly.
corner somewhere.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to put the boundaries and barriers up. You don't want to
Yeah,
unnecessarily exposed. Yeah. And to
exactly.
have that flexibility to zoom in and zoom out and ride the waveform is really what this
Mm,
is about. Because if you think about doing it right, doing a meditation, having the perfect circumstances so that you could be still and be calm, is reaching for that perfect form, that perfect dancer defined in the Balanchine method. That it's something that you are constructing in the moment, moment, every moment you're with yourself for the purpose, rather, of every moment in how you relate to your environment. That you're able
yeah,
to hold your ground when things get rocky and you're not sure of yourself, that you're able to be open and loving when you want to put up a boundary and just have those options to available to you.
I think that's the thing. It's having it be more of a conscious choice rather than I'm reacting and this is what I do when this happens.
Exactly.
I mean, I've also really enjoyed some of the narration about what I'm doing. I have a sense that that practice, along with maybe the humming, which has been helpful for me, especially when I'm around others
Mm.
and feeling, I don't know, uncomfortable or anxious, that those have helped me start to see more clearly that I have this sort of, I call her the codifier. So it's like a rule maker.
Mm.
Um, but essentially, it's this part of me that when I'm doing something, that makes me feel vital and alive. Let's say I ate a good breakfast and I did this workout and I did my coherent body work. It kind of tells me, okay, and you're going to do this and this exactly this way every day. I realize that that comes from a place of really wanting good things for me. Like, oh, I'm feeling good. But there's something about, and it has to be exactly this way in order for it to happen, that doesn't serve me, right? It just creates more of this rigidity. That's been really helpful to see, but to your point, to see it with a more welcoming attitude. So rather than going to a place of shame or pushing that away too, it's kind of like, oh, yeah, I see what you're doing. And in fact, what I can do instead now is encourage myself. So that's what I've been trying to do. Like, I think I'm needing some recognition for the fact that, like, I did these things today and that feels really good.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's it. Like, I
Yeah.
don't have to then say, and I'm going to do it exactly this way every day for,
Yeah.
X, Y, and Z. So in a way, I think the work around preach, I think that's what you call it, has started to sink in that way for me. So I'm recognizing a pattern that can lead me to more rigidity and control, even when it's around something seemingly good. Instead, when I notice that, I can choose a way to encourage myself or cheerlead myself, but in a way that leaves room for life.
I'm hearing a couple of things. One is I studied with a behavioral psychologist from Stanford. His name's BJ Fogg. He wrote
Mhm.
Tiny Habits. He did this big study where he had people training in his method, which is 3 steps. The first is you find a habit that you want to introduce into your life and you break it down into very, very, very small steps. So you make it tiny and it's ridiculously tiny. Like if you want to start jogging, you put your shoes by the door, really breaking it up so that you can't fail, basically. You're setting yourself up for success.
Mhm.
The second is you connect it to a trigger that you already do in your life. Brushing your teeth is a very common example. So there's kind of like a pre-choice in there. When I do X, I will do Y. The part that dials it in is this
Mm.
self-encouragement that, yay,
Right.
I did it. Because most people miss that part. And that's the hardest part, particularly when it's very easy. You feel like you don't deserve it. But once you get that going, the building up of that habit, the practice of that habit, the desire for you to complete it is not a cognitive thing anymore. It's this emotional thing that is finishing the feedback loop so that you'll do it again
Mm.
and again. You are performing the tiny habit, you're progressing on your own process because you feel good about it, not
Yeah.
because you ticked it off the list
Yeah.
or you had to do this to be good, but that there's an intrinsic pleasure or
Mhm.
satisfaction to having following through on the promise to yourself, really.
It's really helpful to hear.
Yeah,
Yeah, just kind of like closing the loop. And I think it speaks to something that resonates for me. It's one thing to have a goal and want to achieve an outcome. And once you do, kind of feeling that high, which I know for me doesn't last, there's no hang time. Like maybe there are a couple of hours and then it's like on to the next thing. There's something so much more fulfilling and rewarding when I'm really like in the process and enjoying the process.
that flow.
And it's not about the outcome, right? And I experienced that with dance. I don't think I would have continued. You don't put yourself through that kind of pain generally unless you are enjoying the journey.
Exactly. Exactly. It's kind of like calculus, right? So instead of a big chunk and you try to measure it in a line, it's all those little points that make a curve.
Yes.
So if you
Yes.
break down your path, you break it down into the little points that you go through the process, it now you feel the flow, you ride the waveform. I'm going to go from here to this goal, is straight line, is you could break it down so it becomes a curve because there are going to be ups
Mm-hmm.
and downs to the curves and they're tiny little pieces, just like writing the waveform, finding the calculus in
Yeah.
your process of getting to the goal.
I love that. And I also love that it sounds like there is agency in terms of creating those little moments to be able to experience it in that way instead of just the straight line goal.
Yeah. And then the whole thing becomes this creative emerging process. And the question that we all sit with, that we all struggle with as humans, is we don't know what's happening. We have no control over it, and we may fool ourselves into thinking that we have control, but in
Yeah.
the end, the outcomes are always unknown. And to be able to roll with it is to be able to feel the flow of participation in life.
And I think saying that is so important. Like, it's so important to hear that because I know from a cultural standpoint, especially within professional life, it doesn't feel as if that's allowed, right? There's this unspoken pressure sometimes to, especially as you're in managerial and executive roles, to know exactly what you're doing and to know what the answer is. It doesn't feel like there is permission to acknowledge a very simple, basic reality. And I think I've come up against that friction so many times within myself, where it feels like I have to perform, put on this mask of looking like I know what I'm doing when I don't really.
Mhm.
And then the sort of terror that can come up around that. So I think it's really helpful that we talk more about this as a society and give ourselves permission to be in touch with that basic reality. Like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's going on. There are days when like I don't know how I'm doing. Somebody can ask me, like, I really don't know.
Mhm.
Let alone like why am I here? The big questions. Why am I here? What's my purpose?
I
And
mean,
so
context
I,
matters too, because definitely it's like that question of why you're here,
of course.
within the context. So one of the things is like when you're in a professional context with certain rules, there's a linguist who talks about this as the framing. When you say something in the exact same thing in one context is
Mm,
received one way, but in another context is received a different way. You're always dancing with the different elements. And when you're in a place where the setting is not shaped by yourself because you're working for someone else, then there are certain, let's say, rules of engagement. And
absolutely.
it's your way of engaging with those rules within yourself that can make it feel like this or make it feel like this. And
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. Yes.
yeah, and the trick
Context
is
matters.
within that context is like, where's the flow? Because no matter what the context is, and that's what the Viktor Frankl quote is about, no matter what the context is, you have this flow available to you that gives you agency over your choice in the moment. The little tag on to that is my body of work is that thing starts in the body. Those words that you say to yourself, those thoughts that percolate, the raw materials of that comes up from your felt sense. And the felt sense of something, even within yourself, is going to be highly context dependent. How safe you feel, how you feel the limitations of the context, whether it feels limiting or it gives you guardrails.
That is so helpful.
Great things about a professional setting where it's a lot easier to flow is the guardrails are pretty directly defined. The guardrails in social situations are not as clear, and there is a real skill set of riding waves in those settings
Oh,
because
yes.
we're constantly trying to figure out, is this appropriate, is it not? And I think for a lot of people, especially these days, because there's so many guardrails that are gone.
Yeah, absolutely. So agree. The professional realm has been both an incredibly fruitful place for me to move beyond limitations that I feel like I've had in other areas of my life because of what you're talking about. But also, these things come up. And I'm glad to hear I'm not the only one who's constantly asking, like, is this appropriate? But even as someone who's worked in a Fortune 500 company versus a startup, that is such a cultural difference. And knowing how
Yes.
to communicate with your colleagues and peers and what is appropriate and what does hierarchy mean and no hierarchy and what can I expect of others and what should I expect of myself in terms of decisiveness and giving direction and how much room do you give for someone else to move within that versus holding them accountable when they don't. And even within just the size of a company changing and the formality, that can be very challenging to navigate, but it also keeps it exciting, I suppose, and challenging.
And I think we're going more and more to those smaller groups just in general because it's too
Yeah,
vast to have something so big and impersonal that the smaller we get, the more we can interrelate and we can start to look at the dynamics of what it means to be human. One of the things I'm super interested in is how technology, AI, and that humanization of technology or replication, let's say, of humans, of technology, how it forces us to really understand what makes us human, what makes us really creative, what makes us empathetic, what is empathy. All of this stuff is kind of shoved in our face. The more technology advances, the more we have to understand, like at the core, what do we do as humans? Because a lot of those jobs were trying to make us like robots or algorithms, and now we have them. It should be a relief, actually, that we don't have to reduce ourselves down to those repetitive tasks, but it's also scary because that might have been a good guardrails that made you feel like you
mm,
had rhythm in your day at times where I've been unemployed for a while. And that's a hard time because you're uncertain, so uncertain.
absolutely.
You have to
Yeah.
create some sort of structure. And it's so frustrating when it feels like you're bumping your head up against negative responses.
Yeah. And learning how to continue to trust oneself in the midst of such an uncertain scenario. I've been there too. And I think that's another thing that I feel like this work, it builds a kind of self confidence in a very new, fresh way. So, deriving confidence from achievement, position that only lasts so long and ultimately isn't really that satisfying. There's something deeper clearly that, defines and unites us as human beings. And I think to your point, it's scary because this question is being presented more and more with AI and what is it that makes us human? And it's been interesting to work for a tech company, which I fell into, as it were, but also one going through a transformation where much of the work that we're doing, especially I would say that some of the most effective work is in smaller teams where we're organized to be very cross functional. And so that begs the question, okay, well, what is more efficient or helpful or beneficial about that? And so much of it is this kind of human to human interaction where we're complementing one another, we're expanding our own sort of understanding, domain knowledge, and interdisciplinary work, and breaking down the old hierarchical stay in your silo model. I don't know, maybe AI has got that one too. We'll see. But it is certainly an interesting time, and I think a huge question to be asking.
It's
Uh,
fascinating. We're figuring out as we go along, and people are really scared. Some people are excited. Some people get frustrated. And that reflects your interface with
in
that.
a reality too.
It's really interesting because when you're trying to figure out something that you don't understand at all, because that's what a kid is, right? He's trying to figure out the world, and the parent either he's on his own, he's free range, and then you make up all these stories and you go into these elaborate, complex ways to try to figure out the world, or you're scared and you shut down, and then you want to fight it, or you're optimistic about it. And to be able to ride with something and be optimistic about it, even if you're not sure about it, is I think the challenge for yourself. Like, how do I stay with something that I don't know my own skills in? Am I doing it right? That's the most common question I get. Yeah, and that
Yeah, the self-doubt that comes up and then
yeah,
how it gets its tentacles into
yeah,
everything.
yeah. And then you want the parent or the guide to help you. Let's make this a little shorter for me, or you hire a coach or a mentor, make this a little shorter for me. But when you don't have that,
Mm.
because like with AI is new territory, it's harder to ask that question or you wait. It's interesting when you can challenge yourself and rise to the occasion because then you have to dig deep and find something within yourself. Like you said, you found elements of yourself in your professional life that the context gave you that freedom because there were some limitations on it.
Absolutely. And the maybe the permission or the autonomy that I might not have felt otherwise. So it has played to my sense of over responsibility in good ways. Whereas maybe in my personal life, sometimes that does not work out so well. It's a really amazing, it's hard to believe I'm saying this because I've resisted it for so many years. Yeah, with one foot sort of pressing the gas all the way to the floor, very professionally driven. And with the other, it felt like having my foot fully on the brake because inside it felt so uncomfortable. And yeah, like I think I still questioned, is this the right path for me with that background that I shared with you, moving from the arts to at least the soft sciences, I guess you could say. And yeah, it's been a really wonderful field for growth, for integration. It's taken me several decades to get to a point where I feel like I can say that.